Warning, guests of The Roy Green Show may experience the truth, being in the hot seat, and in some cases, crying.
The Roy Green Show continues on the Chorus Radio Network.
I wonder, was Bill Morneau okay handing over $200 in that fine for violating the Ethics Conduct Code of Canada? $200. And we don't even know if he's completely open with Canadians yet. We'll be talking about that with Catherine, Linda, and Michelle on Beauties and the Beast a little later on. And Harvey Weinstein may be arrested for rape in New York. He's got district attorneys all over the United States interested in him. And yet a Canadian judge set free a man who raped his wife because the husband thought he was entitled to. And the judge said that the man was not particularly credible as far as his appearance in court was concerned. But no, they found him not guilty because he didn't know that he wasn't allowed to engage sexual intercourse with his wife when she said no. No, we can't find him guilty, no. Scott Newark will speak to that, former Alberta prosecutor and executive director of the Canadian Police Association. That's coming up next hour. So last weekend, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser was on this program, as he has been many, many times. And the founder of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, former United States Navy Lieutenant Commander, past president of the Arizona Medical Association and nuclear cardiologist, author of Battle for the Soul of Islam. And Dr. Jasser told us that he'd been invited by the Canadian Parliament to attend a hearing for Motion 103, the anti-Islamophobia motion that never has provided a definition of what Islamophobia is. So Dr. Jasser made his way to Canada from Arizona to participate with the parliamentary committee, MPs from the individual political parties, and he presented his case. And he told us on this program more than once, more than twice, more than 3 times, that he doesn't like the term Islamophobia, that it doesn't do anything for Muslims, and that he opposes it. So he very graciously and politely made his case to the MPs. The Liberal MPs, one in particular, was not enthralled with Dr. Jasser and apparently called him an extremist. And he lumped in Raheel Raza as well because one witness had said she'd had something to do with rebel media. Well, perhaps that MP and all the MPs who have a problem with Raheel Raza should do a little bit of history studying about their own parliament, because when Raheel Raza spoke to the Canadian Parliament, she received a standing ovation from MPs and senators. Anyway, I had a conversation. Scott Reid is a Conservative member of Parliament. He's part of that committee, and Scott was listening. He was there. He heard what was going on. He was so, I'll let him choose the word he wants, but he was disappointed in what took place between Dr. Jasser and the Canadian Liberal MP that Scott Reid posted on Facebook, his feelings. And we'll talk to Scott Reid after I play back for you the interview that I recorded on Thursday, this past Thursday, with Dr. Jasser about his experience with Canada's parliamentarians. Dr. Jasser, did the committee give you background on M103? What did they tell you about the motion before you arrived? And did they give you any expectation of what they wanted from you?
They just simply sent me the what they were charged with, and the fact that they had 250 plus days to address it and then respond back. There was no pretext as to what they wanted from me other than for me to provide testimony on M103 and what my opinion was of it. So I provided a long-form written testimony to them that I've distributed and posted, and then I was given 10 minutes to summarize my comments. And I basically laid out that, Canadians need to be aware of the primary problem being unintended consequences, that this was started by MP Ikra Khalid. It did arise out of E411, and that the language would simply focus on Islamophobia. While it may be intended to prevent bigotry against Muslims, any type of democracy looking at even the term or the concept Islamophobia would end up enacting blasphemy laws and protecting an idea, Islam, rather than protecting Muslims. And that's really smacks of the language of theocracies.
So is it fair to assume that some of them, most of them, were not exactly welcoming of your position?
Yeah, what was interesting is that my understanding is that the Standing Committee was supposed to be gathering information, bringing witnesses to get our opinions. I mean, they can go back and deliberate and do with it what they want, but actually what happened was, other than my 10 minutes, and some of the conservatives did ask me some questions and wanted some responses, the three liberals that asked me questions basically took up the 7 minutes lecturing me, especially Arif Virani, who basically used up his entire time to lecture me about my position and how offended he was, and that the resolution had nothing to do with M103, had nothing to do with Islamophobia. It was simply protecting minorities. And then he went to saying that I offended the 70,000 citizens that signed the E411. So it was just sort of a bizarre, almost like the Standing Committee was on a stage rather than actually gathering information from those of us giving testimony.
Must have been embarrassing to hear that.
It was, and I saw a post from MP Scott Reed, who apologized to me publicly, not that he had to, but on behalf of his committee, and actually he wasn't on the committee, but on behalf of the Canadian Parliament, and basically saying that he was ashamed of what Virani did, and Jenny Kwan also didn't ask me a question, but tried to correct me, saying that this was not about Islamophobia, it was about any and all minorities, which just was not true. And he was hoping that the Standing Committee would actually deliberate and gather information rather than simply grandstanding. So I think, obviously, these things, as much as they may be intended to help improve Canadian society, appear to be simply more partisan politics rather than a reality of improving civil society.
Zudi, was it your sense that the MPs, those who challenged you, didn't know what M103 really was and what it signifies to you, or are they in there with an agenda?
That is such a great question, Roy. The example was Virani, when he was attacking me, said the example of how biased I was that I cited Raheel Raza as a colleague of our reform movement, and that Raheel, because she's associated with rebel media and other what he called extreme outlets, is not credible, and an example of how not credible I was. And then when the chair, because some of conservative responses, they insisted that I be given some time to respond, she added 1 minute and gave me 60 seconds to respond. In that response, I said that he should be ashamed of himself, because he obviously cannot disagree with any of the substance I presented or any of the substance that Raheel presents in her ideas on women's rights, on liberty, free speech, and other things. So instead, he attacks us with guilt by association, which is exactly what he protests happens to Muslims all the time. So he's quite a hypocrite for doing that. And I think it's an example that they don't care about the substance of what we talk about or the reality that happens inside mosques or inside Muslim communities. It's all simply about partisan hackery, if you will. And I was disappointed in that. It's clearly they have an agenda about this. And I think he proved my point by not responding to the value of M103 and dismissing my comments. There's clearly an agenda here to try to suppress a conversation publicly about Islam and Muslims, which needs to happen.
Zuhdi, should Canadians be worried?
Yes, because the conversation about Islam and Muslims should not simply be limited to identity politics and protecting Islam from criticism. This is a national security issue globally with Islamist movements. This is an issue about the identity of Canadian principles and culture and nationalism. So, yeah, I think if you're going to lose battles like this in a committee that is getting duped by a liberal MP that has an Islamist agenda like Iqra Khalid and Arif Virani and others, then you're going to lose your Canadian identity to what I feel is part of this global Islamist insurgency. So I think the good thing that you shouldn't be worried is that I was invited, that you had a number of MPs that have spoken up and thanked me for exposing some of what's actually happening there. And you've had a number of other Muslims who've testified, including Tariq Fatah, Rahil Raza, and others. So I think the battlefront is just opening up, but they need to be engaged and not surrender.
I guess the last question for you would be this one. If M103 raises the concerns that you've raised, Zuhdi, is there the possibility that at some point in the not-too-distant future, a conversation like this one that we've just had would be considered to be Islamophobic?
Absolutely. This is the issue. And as much as Virani tried to lecture me that it was insulting to Canadians to compare it to theocracy in Saudi Arabia, Muslims who question the government are put in prison not for criticizing the king, but for criticizing Islam. They equate criticizing their government with criticizing Islam. They equate dissent with Islamophobia. So there is a slippery slope. Our governments were founded on challenging autocracy, challenging theocracy. But as we saw in Europe, there was one generation away from slipping into fascism. So I think in the guise of minority rights, in the guise of identity politics, you can see a slide away from true free speech. And this is something I told them at the committee. I said the true test, and I told Arif this, I said the true test of your democracy is not how you treat the center squishy middle that wants to not offend anyone. The true test of your democracy is how you treat the peripheral, the folks on the margins who may say things that are offensive, that are distasteful, but aren't openly impending violence on an individual. So we must protect their freedom, and that's how a democracy is tested. Those that are most offensive, not the ones that are in the squishy middle.
Always appreciate the conversations, Zuhdi. Thank you so much.
Anytime. Thanks for having me, Roy.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, as I spoke with him on Thursday morning about his appearance before the Parliamentary Heritage Committee on Motion 103,